thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited because today is a special day for me. I get to interview Miss Jeri Cook, and she is our programs director in Quilt Africa Fabrics. Thank you so much, Jeri, for being with us today.
I'm delighted to be here, Miriam.
So you know how much admiration I have for you. I have said it in so many words and in not so many words. Since we met in 2020, it's been an enriching relationship for me, not just quilting wise, but because we share the same values. And of course, we have our love for quilting. And we've gotten to work with a lot of people over the years, that have brought us deeper into interaction with each other and also our love for quilting. So when I thought about running a series introducing the Nigerian Quilt Guild to international quilters, you were one of the first people that I thought about. And I want to say thank you so much for saying yes. It means a lot to me because I know your quilting journey has stretched so much over the years, and there's so much information that you can share and so much inspiration, and I know that that is what we need in the Nigerian Guild to grow, and just to nurture that love. So without further ado, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us how you got on your quilting journey.
Oh, thank you, Miriam. And I have to say thank you so much because you are an inspiration to me. It's really interesting how we got connected. You sent an email and I responded, and we've been fast friends ever since. I feel like I have had a really international experience with you. And so I'm just very grateful for that. I am, as she said, Jeri Cook, and I am a quilter who has been quilting since I was a little girl, and not actually quilting a real quilt, but putting little pieces together. And I'm a third generational quilter. My great grandmother was a quilter, then my grandmother skipped a generation. My mom was a seamstress, and then my sister and I together evolved into actual quilters. And to be honest with you, I didn't make my first quilt until I was in my 20s. It was from a Georgia bone steel lap quilt book that my sister and I had. Both of us bought the book, and we decided that we were going to use the exact same quilt colors, blue. She got a little polka dot. I got something else. And she made two for her in her son's bedroom because he had two king twin beds, and I just made a twin bed size. So that was my first full quilt. I wasn't really able to do intense quilting at the time because my career was very active. I was a teacher, I was raising my children. My husband had a very active, he was in the corporate world, so he traveled a lot. And we also he had an intense ministry at the church. So much of the time on the weekend, I was trying to take my kids here, take my kids there. Also, I joined a sorority, so that was very the graduate chapter, that was very involved as well. So I didn't really do a lot of quilting unless there was a special event. So if there was a wedding or a baby or something like that, then I would, and it's really interesting. It was kind of like it just would hit me that in my spirit, it would be like, make a quilt for the baby, because I didn't make quilts for everybody. But God just kind of led me to where I needed to make that quilt, and that's what I did. And then, of course, for my family, I was always making quilts for my family. And so that's how I started, and that's how I continue.
So incredible and so good to hear. And I think for a lot of us, that's kind of our story.
Mhm.
I think for the majority, not let me not say everyone, but for the majority, there's been someone in the background
Mhm.
who, if they were not a quilter, they must have been a seamstress. For me, my mom was a seamstress,
Mhm.
and she did her best to get me to the sewing machine. Maybe she started a bit too early. I wanted to play more than I wanted to sew, but she sowed that seed, of creativity in me. And as you know, she introduced me to fabrics as well. So for anyone who has someone in the background, who was creative, who was a sewer, who was, a seamstress or a quilter, you know, and possibly you're here looking for something to do, I think quilting is the right direction, for you to kind of like tilt towards and see whether it will resonate with you. And I think another thing that you said was in the beginning, you didn't make a lot of quilts,
Right.
you know. I think that's one thing that maybe beginner quilters feel like, oh, I'm starting, I have to be churning out a quilt a month or something. No, sometimes, especially in the beginning, the learning process is more of absorption, just being in that environment where people are quilting, where people are doing stuff like that, and then you begin to learn. And that's what makes me so excited about the Nigerian Quilters Guild. We're not really doing a lot of projects yet, but I'm trusting that by bringing on people such as yourself, and just sharing about quilting, the interest will begin to, um, will be birthed and it will be nurtured. And I'm trusting that it will grow. All right. So thank you so much for sharing the beginning part of your journey. So at what point did quilting become integral? At what point did you begin to have um time, you know, to go deeper? Because 300 quilts is a lot.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
300 quilts is a lot. And I know you, Jeri, I know that you put in the expertise and the thoughts, into the creation and the construction. So please let's know how you made the jump from beginning to 300 quilts, the journey.
So I am really a quilter who makes, pretty nice size quilts. All right. I mean, I've made, the size of a bed, queen bed. But the thing about how I can say I made all these quilts, a lot of the quilts were small quilts. And the way
Mm,
that I did it is that I wanted to explore a pattern or some fabric. So what I would do is it was great when you have a quilt room because and you have a stash. That's the other thing about having a stash. You don't have to go out and shop or do anything. You just go to your stash. So a lot of these little quilts that I was making, quilts that were not big size quilts, they were smaller size quilts because I knew that didn't have the time to really invest in, because back then I was doing it all. I was doing, except my mom would do the binding, but I was doing the piecing, the cutting. And back then I wasn't using a rotary cutter. I was using templates, right? Now it's shortcut. So can you imagine cutting all of that out? And it was from paper templates sometimes I didn't have the plastic templates, and it's harder to cut on paper. So what I was doing a lot of times was experimenting with smaller
mm,
projects. And so I
mm,
would end up, making smaller type little quilts, like table runner size or wall hanging size. And so then a lot of times I was just experimenting with the fabric, with the color, trying to figure out what I wanted to do
yeah,
overall because I didn't have time to make a whole big quilt. So that's how I was keeping myself inspired, and that's how
mm,
I was keeping myself in and then the other thing was when we started to going to the International Quilt Festival classes.
mhm.
That was another opportunity. That whole week, we were spending that time quilting. We were spending that time learning. And so I would just come back after that. I'd be inspired, and then I would come back and start to quilt. So it was a gradual kind of thing where I started making more quilts, but I can say I made a lot of smaller quilts. And that's what I want to
Mm,
encourage your guild is don't be so worried about making that big quilt to cover a bed. Just start with something, a table runner. Start with some
yeah,
placemats, something small to get you inspired. And here's the other thing. That African fabric is so beautiful. That print fabric is so beautiful. That's part of the inspiration,
yeah.
to get you going on what you wanted to do. So it was a gradual thing, but it started with small projects and not really big, big, big projects.
Oh, I think that is so key because I'm guilty. I want that king size. I want that California king size quilt, and then between putting together the fabrics and cutting the pieces and piecing them, and I get lost and then I give up. So I think this is a really fantastic tip, just to say go small until you develop the skill, until you have a better understanding of your style as a quilter, and also until you have the time. For someone like me, when you were saying, oh, I had to run my kids,
Mhm.
from
Yeah.
one place, and that's where I am right now. So I don't really have the time to do, and then I have such big dreams, but having said that, I think I'm going to downsize to at least a twin size or a double,
Mhm.
because I don't think I have made anything less than a queen.
Mhm. There you go.
So So, and then I have unfinished ones, unfinished queens, like three, four, five still unfinished because I run out of steam.
Mhm.
So I think I'm going to tweak and change my mindset, just so that I can have finishes because I find that it's also really important for you to have that finish.
Yes.
Just having that finish gives you a boost. You feel so good. And then the learning process in going from start to finish is so much
Mhm.
because you learn piecing, little things that no one
Yeah,
can really teach you unless you
actually
go
do.
through it yourself.
Exactly.
So I think that is one thing we're really going to double down on the guild because for the first project, when we did the hearts tree, I actually made that mistake. I wanted to make it like 36 by 48 inches, and then I said, oh, I shouldn't overwhelm everyone. So at the end of the day, we went fat quarter size, which was about 18 by 22, and as we were creating it, I felt the encouragement. People knew they didn't have a large surface to cover, and they felt like, okay, yeah, I could do this. So I really see what you mean with that. Now, another thing that has also fascinated me and inspired me, and I must say that what I'm about to say is one of the things that actually inspired me to start the Nigerian Quilt Guild, is that while you were working, you got a group of friends together and you started teaching them how to quilt.
Yes.
So please take us through that story because it's one of my favorites.
Yes, it's so interesting because the background of how I got to this location is I worked for the Houston Independent School District, and every few years they restructure. And this particular year they restructured, and it's really a wonderful story because it's really divine. So what happened is I was a friend of mine who was a part of my quilting group, Jackie Kirksey and we had the same title, but we were in different I forget what they called them, but anyway, direct, whatever it was, she was there and I was here. She was in the Southwest and I was in West Central. And so we had teams of people. I had like 33 people on my team. She had about the same, and they decided to restructure. So we spent our time getting them jobs, making sure they had jobs. We worked with our superintendent and our assistant superintendent, and we made sure they had jobs. So we didn't really worry about us having a job, right? We just because we were so worried about them. So at the end of that, when everybody had a job, we didn't have a job. we were out of a job. And
Hmm.
so it was really interesting. It was transitioning. And so the district didn't really have anywhere for us to go. So we went and
Mhm.
worked home. We worked at home.
Wow.
But we didn't have a job, but we worked at home every day on training because we
Mhm.
figured if we found a job. So one day, my friend Jackie calls me and she says, "Hey, have you?" And so we had a friend who worked at the central office, and
Mhm.
she asked us. She was trying to get us a job on her team, but she really didn't have the funds. So finally, she said that one day, my friend's name was Cindy. She was in the shower and she said she came up with this idea. And she went to the head of another department and said to them, I have these two people and I can bring you some business with these two people. Will you accept it? And the people wanted it. So they're, yes, we'll take them. We'll bring them at their own salary. You'll do all this. And so we never looked for a job. Never. We never applied for a job or anything. But God just put us in that situation. And when Janice Brown, who's worked she's worked at the summit too. I was in finally went to the new job. I was in a location. I had a little cubby hole, real small. So to make it real attractive, I had quilts around it. That was going to give me my joy.
Oh.
She passed by one day and she says, "Oh," she said, "I love those quilts." She said, "Did you make that?" And I was like, "Yes, I did." She said, "I've always wanted to learn how to quilt. Can you teach me?" I said, "Absolutely." And so that's how it started. Stephanie Moss, who you know as well,
Mhm.
Mabel Humphrey, Jackie Kirksey, and we started the Quilters Five. And that's how it started.
Wow.
Janice did not know how to sew at all.
At all. I know
Not,
gardening is her passion.
yes, but she could not sew at all. And I told them from the jump street, I don't teach how to use the sewing machine. I teach quilting. I don't teach how to sew garments. I just teach quilting. So my other friend, Jackie Kirksey, who was skilled with the machine, she helped her learn how to use her machine. And that's how we started. So we would start late in the after work. They'd stay after work. And we
Yeah.
started with a basic pattern. And so it's really funny because they tell the story now is that a lot of times you don't know how serious people are going to be. So you have to
Mm.
make them invest a little bit of something, right?
Yes,
So I
yes.
gave them the directions, told them to go to Joann's and to pick out fabric and all their supplies. Well, they were very upset with me because they were like, we don't know how to pick out fabric. We don't know how to do it. And they were fussing the whole time. But when they came back, they had the fabrics that they liked. They chose the colors that they liked. And
Yeah.
it ended up being a very beautiful experience. And so every evening, we started, and they all just got better and better and better and better. Now, two of them they already knew how to sew.
Mm.
And I must say that Stephanie Moss, who's been a part of the Quilt Africa, she already had, mad skills. So to see where she's gone with quilting, all I had to do was fill in the blanks, to tell her
Yeah.
how to sandwich a quilt. But
She's doing amazing.
she's been amazing. She's gone on to, be an award-winning quilter, and she is just amazing. She has great creativity. She has a great eye for color,
She
and
does.
she's just a beautiful human being who's making quilting work in her community. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it started.
Wow, that is so, so, so amazing. So, I love everything about that story. The fact that as a quilter, it's a part of your life. You saw where you needed some color, some life, some of you, and you brought in your quilts, and people saw that and they loved it. And I think that's one of the things I love about quilting, that it's an expression of you. It's an
Mhm.
expression of your person, of your passion, and your personality. And I think that is what they saw, apart from the fact that it's also a thing of skill. And it's so interesting to just think of how you can cut up pieces and put them back together, and then you create something that is both art and utility,
Mhm.
you know?
Yes.
So I mean, I love that story. And the key thing about it also is the fact that people have to take ownership of their learning. They have to take ownership of the desire to want to learn,
Mhm.
and I think this is where we are struggling with a bit in the guild,
Mhm.
that sense of ownership, because um after two physical meetings, sometimes it seems to me as if people want to be spoon-fed, like, okay, it's your thing. If you want me to learn, then you have to be the one to go the whole 9 yards. But I think it shouldn't be that way. If it's something that you like, you're interested in, and that goes for anything, not just quilting. If you have the interest and you want to learn, I think there should be some level of investment and some level of commitment.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to say that with our first project, those who showed up did a really fantastic job. They came ready, they came with all the equipment and supply lists, things on the supply list that I asked for, and it was a really fantastic time of learning. And I loved seeing their excitement. I loved seeing it click. Oh, so you mean if I do this, it's going to be this, and I think that's the joy of learning, which I assume you also saw that, with the Quilters 5, just seeing how they were making the connections and they were getting it, and the excitement and the exuberance. Oh, I can't believe I did this. That is so beautiful to see. Anytime, not just with the guild, but even within our tribe, our community, when we have workshops or the summit, and then we see how people just get it, and the joy and the sense of pride, that and accomplishment. I did this.
Mhm.
I did this. Yeah. So another thing I wanted to talk about is, I know that you're very passionate about taking care of the homeless. I know it's something that your husband was also very passionate about, and it's something that you are you really drill on in your home church. So I'd like for you to tell us how quilting has played a part in your sponsoring, and donating quilting, any of your quilting pieces, to that passion that you have.
Well, I guess I need to start with my church, St. John's downtown. It was established in 1992, and the pastors, Rudy and Juanita Rasmus, they were at one of the large churches, which was everybody will know if they're from this area. It's the Windsor Village United Methodist Church, and so they were tasked with going to a church. And when they arrived at the church, they had to step over someone who was sleeping on the steps. And Juanita Rasmus said immediately, "This is our ministry." And so that's how it started. It started with that church, small numbers of people who and it was in downtown Houston. So there was, a nice population. Our church was the only one in 1992 who really had that focus. That was Pastor Rudy. That was his love that for those people. And so my husband was actually at another church, and he had a friend that came and said, "Hey, there's this church in downtown Houston. They're serving the homeless." My husband was there the next Saturday, joined the church, and was part of the
Wow.
Saturday. And so they would serve breakfast on a Saturday, and
Mm.
they would serve it in the upstairs of the church. The parishioner, the homeless people would eat in the sanctuary. So,
Mm.
and there would be a Bible study in the sanctuary because you got to feed people before you give them the
Yes.
word, right?
Yes,
So there would be
absolutely.
the food, and then they would have the sanctuary. So eventually they would build a separate facility called the Bread of Life. It was another facility, and that's from the scripture. Jesus says, "I'm the bread of life," and so that's what it was based on. And so my husband would go down and lead a group of people every Saturday. Eventually, the church would also do, they would be able to serve through the week and sometimes on Sundays and all of that. But my husband was a big part of that ministry. So when my husband he passed away in 2011. But prior to that time, I would always say, "You know what? I'm going to make some quilts for the homeless people." I always said that, but I never did it. So after he passed away in 2012, I just felt like God was telling me it's time to do it. And so the church had what was called an after dark program. In the wintertime, the homeless people could come off the street into this facility where they would get a meal. They would have
Mm.
warm. There would be a circulation where they could take showers. It couldn't be every night, but they had that, and it had rules and everything. Well, the director of that program uh, knew my husband, and I knew her and everything. And so I went to her and I said, "Hey, what about us giving quilts to them?" And she said, "That would be wonderful." So there were 75 people who would be in
Mhm.
that after dark program. So I recruited my five quilters five. Then I asked my sister and my neighbor Harriet,
Mhm.
and we then became I think it was who was that? So it was 5, 6, 7, 8. So it ended up being eight of us. Okay, it
Yeah.
ended up being eight of us. And so what we did, you had to do 12 quilts a month because
Okay.
and you would and so it ended up that we had a lady from Chile who came and joined us. She made four beautiful art quilts. It was amazing.
Mhm.
Then we had
Mhm.
another friend from work who heard what we were doing, and she did. So we ended up giving 103 quilts, but 75 homeless people got the quilts. And then the director, Faye Robinson, I said, "So, how are you going to distribute it?" She knew them so well. She would say, "That quilt will go to so and so, and that quilt will go to so and so, and that quilt to go to so and so." And people would ask me, "Oh my goodness, you're taking all that money, making all those quilts and giving them to the homeless people?" I said, "Yes." And what we would do, we would pray over them. Every one of them had the scripture that what Jesus said, that I am the bread of life. Every
Mhm.
scripture would have that. The label had that, had my husband's name, that it was in memorial to
Mm.
him who made it. We also gave them names of the quilts, and they were distributed. And so we were able to give to the homeless community 103 quilts.
Wow. And I know that's something that you're looking to revive. I know you've done that in smaller levels, but you're looking to revive it again on a larger scale, as larger scale as the first time.
Well, what we're hoping to do is that now, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in the United States, we have a program where children can go into foster care. And
Mm,
they go into a home, and the people who take care of them, they're provided funds to take care of them. Well, when they turn 18, they're that's it. We call it aging out. They age out of the foster program. So what I'm
mm,
hoping to do is to be able to minister to that. My church, uh, Bread of Life, my pastors have retired, but they now retain the rights to the Bread of Life. And
mm,
so our pastor, it's on his heart to have a place for those children after they
mm.
come out. So I hope that we'll be able to make sure that we have quilts for the aging out of foster care program, still affiliated with the Bread of Life.
Good life. Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. That is beauty and creativity and legacy all in one.
Yeah.
And those are three things that excite me anytime, any day. That you create you're able to use your God-given creativity to create some beauty, and in the process of that, building a legacy, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I think it's just so amazing to just see the progression, you know, of how something that you inherited
Mm-hmm.
from your grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
took it a step further, taught, just able to impact friends, two of which I know. So, and I know they tell the story, it's just to see how you got to impact them, and then to be able to touch lives. I think that is so important,
Yes.
because if what we do is able to touch just one life, I think it is so worth it. It is so worth it. And it's even a greater thing if we are able to take out of our pockets,
Mm-hmm.
and create something and give it to somebody with no expectation of a reward or a
Right.
return. I
Right.
think that is just so amazing, and that is so scriptural, and
Right.
that touches me, you know, so deeply. So thank you so much for what you're doing, for everything that you are, for who you are. That's just spills into what you're doing. You're just a giving person. You've been giving to Quilt Africa, giving to the summit, and giving to everyone who has come in contact with the summit and with Quilt Africa. And I am able to see the trail of that from early on in your life. And I just want to celebrate you for that.
Thank you.
And so we are going to end, we're going to end soon, but not without talking about your feature in Quiltfolk magazine, one of the foremost quilting magazines in the US, and I think around the world, really, because everywhere you go, people talk about Quiltfolk. I mean, that was one of the first magazines that I knew.
Mhm.
In fact, I think I know only two. I think the Fonz and Porter, and
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure if they're still producing, and Quiltfolk. Those are the only two quilt magazines I know in the whole wide world. So I know it's such a big deal. And I was so excited, when it was in the works, and it has come. And I am so proud. And I think nobody's deserving of having their work shown as you have, especially because you're not on a platform of, I'm a professional textile artist. This is just you out of your passion and out of your desire to give and to make an impact.
Mhm.
So I'm really very excited about it. I'm so proud. I have bragging rights right here in Nigeria. I have bragging rights that someone I know, has been featured in the Quiltfolk magazine. So I just wanted to kind of like um, share the highlights of that, how the story started, and the experience of having the Quiltfolk people over, and how that has changed your life or impacted your life or just made you see your quilting abilities in a different way, maybe.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Miriam. I appreciate that. I appreciate all that you've done to promote the article and everything. And so I just need to do a highlight here is that the quilt folk is really about regular folk, okay? Everybody doesn't have to be a great, everybody knows you. What and in the Quilt Africa, we call those unsung quilters. when we
Yes.
have that
Yeah.
feature. It's an unsung person where they're doing great things, but they may not be famous. And so
Yeah.
while they have famous people in there as well, well-known people, they have regular old people like me. So
Mm.
I received an email from Brianna saying, "Hey, we'd like to feature you in Quiltfolk," and it was an email. And I was like, I wrote back to her. I was like, I think you have the wrong Jerry Cook. And she sent back to me, she said, no, I think it's the right one. And so I sent back to her, so, well, how did you find out about me? And she said, Stephanie Moss.
Oh.
Stephanie said at my reception, she said that she had been waiting for some kind of way to give me props. She said, some way I'm going to get Jeri recognized. And so it was all Stephanie Moss, and thank God
Wow.
Stephanie's in the same magazine. So it was really, and I have to be very transparent. At the time, my mom was in hospice in my home.
Mm.
So a lot of times with quilt folk, they like to come to your home, see where you work, and that would have been fine. But the caregivers, my family in and out, taking care of my mother. And at the time, my mother was, doing really well. I mean, she
Mm.
was totally alert and, everything was good and great, but she was still having to have some care in the home. And so I felt like that would be too disruptive and disrespectful of my mother to just have people traipsing through
Mm.
because my quilt room is right next to her little suite that
Yeah.
she stayed in. So I asked my daughter if I could do it at her house. And so, but I was also getting ready to leave on an international trip.
Yes.
So I told them, I said, I really don't think I'm going to be able to do it because, you're leaving on the whatever. And they were so nice. They had the photographer and the writer, they had them, the photographer and the stylist, they had them stay an extra day. So I was coming back that Sunday. They said they stayed till Monday. I mean, they readjusted everything. And I'm sure it's at some expense to them so that they could do that. And so they came to my daughter's house and they styled everything. My daughter has a beautiful home and they just worked, asked me questions, and it was just the wonderful experience of the Azurie and her husband. It was just a wonderful experience. And then I was interviewed by Zoom and phone by Courtney Mabus, and that's the experience. The way they
Mm.
question you and ask things you don't even think about. She just pulled things out of me and
Yeah.
said that article is a reflection of just great photographer, stylist, and writer. And, they just
Wow.
pulled out things of me that I didn't expect. The other thing is that, a lot of times, you know, we just live our lives. We're not living our lives to do a report. We're not living our lives to be on TV. Well, at least not
Yes.
us, what I'm saying? Some people are, but so I'm just living my life. It's just how God has
Yeah.
made me. And so
Hmm.
I didn't want to, I'm not a tutor of my horn. That's not me. I would
Yeah.
rather be in the background and give other people credit. And
Yeah.
so I wasn't ready for it. I really wasn't. And I wasn't excited about it. And my kids kept saying, aren't you excited? I was like, no, there's nothing to tell. There's no story to tell. But it just reminded me that, you know, God has a plan and a purpose for everybody. And
Yes. Yeah.
sometimes we don't see it as clearly as he sees it. But if you just walk in the path that he has for you, then some kind of way
Hmm.
it all comes together. It all
Yes.
comes together. And you could be my daughter, I'm old enough for you to be my daughter, but the whole point is that even in my age, sometimes I, don't realize that everything sometimes it was God's path. And you just have to sometimes you have to put your hands out there and just say, Lord, wherever you take me. And that's what
Yes.
this experience was. So
Yes. Yes.
and so I told them, I said, I have got to tell you about Quilt Africa Fabric. I've got to tell you about this woman who lives in Nigeria, who had this summit in 2020, and we had some blackout stuff and all kinds of stuff. But I said she had Hollis Chatelaine, and from that, I got to be in a class with Hollis Chatelaine from being on Quilt
I
Africa. So I
know, gosh,
had to
we've had
tell
some
them that.
adventures.
Yes, I had to because, and then they didn't have enough information about the people who you got. So I said, no, you're gonna have to include these people. You need to know who she's getting in here. And yeah, she said, is there anything else you want after the article's about done? And I was like, wait a minute, you don't have enough about Quilt Africa Fabrics for me. So she was like, no problem. So when I saw the article, I was like, she put everything in.
She did. She
She put
listened to you.
everything
Oh,
in. She
wow.
put
And
everything
I'm
in.
so excited.
Yeah,
Honestly, I was
yeah,
like, "Ooh, what?"
yeah,
But I
yeah,
know it's just all because of you. And I'm not surprised that they picked, I mean, that they, I mean, somehow, I'm not surprised that Stephanie recommended you, spoke to them about you. I'm not surprised that they picked it up because you're such a giver.
Mm.
You know, you are such a giver and you give, you give pure. There's some giving that is not pure. Your giving is so pure and it's so um it hits the spot, you know. And I can say that because it's actually 6 years since we've been together, you know, and it's 6 years of you mothering me. We don't call it mother-daughter, but you mother me, you know, and I know it and I appreciate it so much. And I think of all the times that, you know, that you've given me amazing advice in life, in faith, professionally, you know, and in so many ways. And I hold myself accountable to you. There are sometimes maybe and I say, Jeri, this is what I'm thinking and this is what is going on, you know, because I value what you have to say to me, you know, because you're so giving and I don't feel that there's anything I cannot tell you, you know. And so to me, because I'm a Christian and because I believe that everything we do is a seed, that one day God looks at it and he says, hey, angels, water that seed. I want to see some fruit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I don't see the invitation or the feature in Quiltfolk as random. I see it as God just saying, I want to see some fruit for Jeri. I want to see, you know, I want to see some recognition for her, you know, and all of that. And it is so well deserved because I mean, I'm not sure how many professionals even have up to 300 things that they've done or have given away up over 100. That's a lot. It doesn't matter what it is, what size it is, it's a lot. You know, I'm not even sure if sellers actually have given out over 100, like sold over 100 that have gone into people's homes, you know. So I think it's just amazing and it's just a testament of who you are. And it's an encouragement, you know, it's an encouragement to me. It's an encouragement to a lot of us who are, like you said, are just regular people doing what we know to do, not looking for anything, but just doing what we believe in, expressing ourselves through our creativity. I think that is just for me, that is, that is what your feature in Quiltfolk represents, you know, and I'm honestly so proud and 100% well deserved. That's what Bob says and Lisa says and Monica says and everyone who is in the chat, you know, they're just dropping that and they're saying absolutely it's well deserved because they've all had occasion to work with you and how you just work with us all, you know, and you pull things together. And I literally go to sleep when things are being handled by you. I do not worry at all, you know, and that was it from the beginning. And I just know that it has to do with all of who you are, you know, and honestly, you do amazing work. You do amazing work that you hide. So I'm going to tell I'm going to tell everybody to go on and get the Quiltfolk magazine issue 38. Jeri is featured there. Stephanie Moss is also featured in there, you know, and so far we have two winners because I'm giving away the magazine. We have two winners and they're going to receive their copies shortly, and I cannot wait for my copy to get to me here in Nigeria. I'm so excited about that.
Well, I do
You know,
need to tell you this is that the online version of the magazine has Stephanie and I completely in it. The 38 part only has us featured at the very last page. But here's the thing, that's because, so this is a good thing. There's more readership with the virtual online than the print
Oh,
magazine. So there's
oh,
more.
but I have to have the print.
Yeah, but
I
the
have to
print
have
is,
the print.
yeah, the print has a little,
I want them both.
yeah, we're at the very back, a little thing like that. But if you know Georgia Williams, Georgia is in, she's in the print magazine. So she's another one of the tribe, and she's been at
Okay.
the summit. So she's in there, and she's the first winner of the first challenge. So she
Yes.
is in there. But Stephanie and I are in the online virtual. So that one that we sent, and it's on Facebook and all of those. Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
So yeah,
definitely. I have to
yeah,
get both. I
yeah,
just felt I wanted to hold it in my
yes,
hands
yes,
and
yes,
so
yes,
I
yes,
definitely have to have the
yes,
print copy as well,
yes.
So I mean it's just so amazing and I think it's just a crowning glory, to everything that you've done. Giving, sharing your creativity, sharing of who you are, and we all came together because of quilting, you know. So I'm really excited about that. But in conclusion, what words do you have in closing to our very young guild, our very young Nigerian Quilt Guild, our very reluctant audience? And sometimes the reluctance is because they're not sure the what quilting is about, what the guild is about. Sometimes it's because of the economic situation in the country. Quilting can be expensive, the supplies and all of that. And honestly, the tribe have been amazing. So far, we have had two full donations of thread, of rulers,
Oh,
of
that's
rotary cutters.
right.
Bob is one of the donors. Janice Parsons is another of they send in boxes with stuff. So I know that our meetings going forward is going to be a whole lot easier because people can actually have working stations. And
Oh,
I'm so excited, about that. And there's calls for anything you need, let us know. So double-sided fusing, fusible, web, we're getting all of that. And I just want to take
okay.
time to say thank you to our community, to the Quilt Africa community for supporting the Nigerian Quilt Guild. But knowing that even though the US ranks as one of the countries with the largest quilting population, there's still people who are new. There's still people who are a little bit reluctant. There's still people who are feeling the economic pinch,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and are not able to just step in. Because even in Quilt Africa, sometimes I say, look, if the cost of the fabric is your problem, is an issue for you, let me know and I'll ship you something just so you can get started. So I know that all of these reasons are not peculiar to Nigeria,
Mhm.
So with that in mind, what words of encouragement or advice, do you have to give to us? I know one peculiar problem we have here is we are not really, we don't really have hobbies,
Oh,
don't really have hobbies the way I see our tribe like throw themselves into quilting and
uh-huh.
into the projects that we do. We really don't have hobbies. And I think that's another thing that kind of like holds people back. So
Mhm.
with all of these reasons, why not
Mhm.
share with our members who are watching today and in the future through the recording reasons why they should begin to take those steps that will lead them to um, a quilting journey, much like yours.
Well, I think first of all, it creates community. And in this culture that we live in now and the way the world is, just having a community where you're doing something together. That's really important, I think, with community, the thing. The other thing is legacy, is that quilting and creating things leaves a legacy for your family, for your community. It encourages you. And also, one of the things I think is important is to bring the children along so that the value of doing something with your children, creating something together with your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, and we have what I'm loving is seeing all of the men who are now quilters, loving Bob's, the work that he does, beautiful, beautiful
Yeah,
work. And
beautiful.
so bringing that along, but the thing that it does for a lot of people is the therapeutic nature of creating something. We were born creative. You know,
Yeah.
we were blessed in this creation to see the stars and the moon. That's creation. And so what it does is it pulls out of us our individual creativity, and it's therapeutic. It's
Yes.
healing. Sometimes you can just go into a quilting room and you don't even have to, you can just cut up some fabric and, fuse it together and put it on a background and go, hey, look what I made, It doesn't take a lot, but it's the whole idea we were born to create. And
Yeah.
so quilting is just that wonderful opportunity to create.
Awesome, incredible. I couldn't have said it better. Just focusing on the fact that it's something you do for yourself. It's something you do that like you said, heals you and anchors you and just gives you an opportunity to be in control from beginning to the end. It's your choice, it's your colors, it's how you want to do it. I think that is so important. And a lot of the times in the back and forth, the rat race, the hustle, the trying to keep our head above water with life. We just need that little time and that little corner to just go in and just be and just be
Mhm.
and just be and just create. Thank you so much, Jeri, for this time. I've had a good time catching up as always. We do that almost every week, especially with the summit. But I will never say no to an opportunity to sit down with you and to talk and to just enjoy listening to you, your experience, your wisdom, and of course your quilting prowess, you know. And I'm so, so grateful for the words and the opportunity to show the Nigerian Quilt Guild members what it takes to be a quilter. It's nothing, it's not out of reach. It's something that you can do, and it's something that always leads to something amazing and awesome, you know. So, if you have any final words, would love to hear it. And I actually wanted to, I actually wanted to um ask if you could share a little bit about your process. I know it's a bit late. It skipped my mind, but I would love to hear about your process. How you choose a project, how you choose your colors, and how you execute, how you get started, you know. Yeah.
So, inspirationally, a lot of times over many of the years, I took classes. And so I was inspired by the teachers. And a lot of
Mm,
times they had patterns and all of that. But before that, I was doing it all myself. I was just finding some fabric, seeing, and a lot of it was just the basic patterns. You have the half square triangle, so I would just have some fabric and I would just go in my quilting room and I would just start cutting up and putting stuff together. That's how it really started. Then
mm,
when I started taking classes, the patterns became more complicated.
yeah.
And so I would do the really hard ones. As you are aware, I did the Judy Niemeyer, which was a pattern, but from that, I feel like it took away my fear of
Mm,
just
mm,
kind of doing whatever and not worrying about what somebody else said about the colors, just liking it. I haven't really paid very much attention to the quilting police in my quilting career, but sometimes you do have a little bit in the back of your head. Well, maybe you
yeah.
don't need to do that. But so that's basically my process. A lot of times I use a pattern. Sometimes I'll, do the pattern hack, kind of change it a little bit. But
Hmm.
sometimes I just do the regular units and put together in a quilt. So I've done a little bit of it all. I'm kind of an eclectic quilter. I'm going to
Yeah.
do a little bit of everything. I love collage. Oh man, I
Yes.
love collage. I've always, an applique, raw
Yeah.
edge. I've done that from the very beginning, but it's just kind of, organic, I just, sometimes it's a pattern. And then when I was doing, quilting at my house, when we were doing it once a week, my friends, my other two friends, they would see something and then we would, do it with different colors and everything, but somebody would pick a pattern or something like that. But it's just kind of evolved organic. So it's just kind of all over the place, but really sometimes it's just going in the quilting room and just using what I
Just
know to create something. Yeah.
awesome.
But I
I
have to
think that's
say this, let me say this is that
yes.
I'm so grateful that God gave me the opportunity to work with you and to connect with you all those years ago because we have formed a close bond. And And you're all the way across the world. But
I
it's like
know.
I love technology and Zooming and all of that because I feel like we're just right here next to each other. So thank you so much. I
Thank you
appreciate it.
so much. Oh, the gratitude is all mine, Jerry. And I still pinch myself when it's summit time and we're discussing and you're asking and we are planning and even other events, that I feel we need your expertise. I still pinch myself and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe Jerry comes with all of these decades of experience just for me. And because it's for me, it's for the whole community. And I think everyone can testify about the jump, in the summit experience from when you came on in 2020 up until now. I literally have to pinch myself. I must have done something right, for this to happen to me. So I am just infinitely grateful, and I'm so grateful that we share the same faith, we share the same values, we share the same esteem of quilting. I think that is what gives us the 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 the, the opportunity or the just makes our working relationship so amazing. The fact that you've also taken me as a daughter, you're not afraid to tell me, and I'm not afraid to tell you what I need, where I need advice, where I need counsel. You've just been so amazing with that. And I want to say thank you so much. And I'm so, so excited that you're the one who is kicking off this series, with the Nigerian Quilt Guild to just have people with experience, people that I work with, people they can learn from. You've kicked it off and there's no better person that would have done that. Thank you so much for all the advice. I've picked something from myself. Miriam goes small. You do not have to have the queen size quilt all the time. Do something small so you can finish, so you can learn, so you can have something, that others can enjoy. I picked that up as well, and just the idea that community, it's important for you to have a quilting community, a creative outlet. You picked up on that as well and sharing your process. It doesn't have to be fantastic. It doesn't have to be like anything. Just go in there and be yourself and see what comes out of you. And amazing things have come out. I love your Chadwick portraits. I think it's one of the largest and the really beautiful that I've seen. So maybe we'll be able to convince you to be featured in the summit one of these days.
Maybe, maybe.
So we can see like up close and personal your collection and your body of work. So thank you so much to everyone who has come. Thank you to Bob. Thank you to Monica. Thank you to Lisa. Thank you to Nancy. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And Jeri, I appreciate this so much more than you can know. And Cheryl as well. Wow, thank you so much for coming. I know you had a great time and you picked up a lot. Um, on that note, we're going to say thank you. And we're going to end the interview now. Thank you so much, Miss Jeri.
You, Mary.
Um, take care and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week.
All right. You too, my dear.
All